Hello, GCSE history class. Now, a couple of you have mentioned the end of the Cold War, and this hasn't been covered very well in the books, so I can completely understand why you want to cover this. So, the end of the Cold War really begins in 1979 with the USSR's invasion of Afghanistan. Basically, the Muslim guerrilla force, the Mujahideen, were trying to take control of the country, which was communist. So the Soviets invaded very much in a similar sort of Vietnam-style thing. The USA wanted to stop the spread of communism. The communists want to basically ensure that communism carries forward. So the Americans now are retaliating. They support the Mujahideen. And they support the countries around there. They have oil interests in the area, so they're concerned about those. This is all going on there. President Carter boycotts the Olympic team from the 1980 Moscow Olympics. Then, in 1980, Ronald Reagan is elected to be president, and he is really anti-communist. In 1983, he calls the USSR the evil empire, and one of his ideas was to try and basically bankrupt the Soviets out of the Cold War. So he developed the neutron bomb, he developed more cruise missiles, and then he developed Star Wars, which I believe was actually called Strategic Defense Initiative. But basically, it was these lasers in the sky, in space, that would destroy missiles that were heading for them. And this development in the arms race, the Soviets couldn't really keep up with. And in 1985, Gorbachev became the leader of the USSR, and immediately things started to change. He began to withdraw troops from Afghanistan, and they eventually were fully withdrawn in 1989. He could see the state of the country. The country was not in a good state when it came to the economy. They could not afford being in Afghanistan and the arms race. So he also began strategic arms reduction talks, or START. This led to, in 1987, the INF Treaty, which I think it was something like the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty, something like that, but it's INF Treaty. And they signed it, and what it did is, the deadline was the 1st of January 1991, and what they had to do is they had to destroy certain batches, certain types of missiles that they had. I think one of them was intercontinental ballistic missiles. I'm not quite sure the specific missiles, but basically they had to get rid of some missiles. And by the deadline, about 2,800-ish, so you could probably get away with saying maybe 3,000, probably 3,000. 3,000. I believe it was 3,000. Let me just check. Yeah, 2,692. So you could say 2,700 or 3,000. 2,700, the INF Treaty. And I might as well check what it actually means, shouldn't I? That's very, very irresponsible of me. Sorry about that. INF. Yes, the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty. I was right. Okay, so that happens, and also Gorbachev begins retreating from the satellite states. He begins taking his troops out of there to save money, and also he relaxes the whole communist system. Really, he promotes sort of more freedom, and there's more competition between businesses. And basically, what happens is that as people get word of just, the communist people who are living in the communist countries get word of what's going on, they realize the economic state they're in, and they're in a dire economic state compared with countries that are outside the Soviet Union. So when the forces retreat from the satellite states, Gorbachev just sort of hopes that communism will continue and even strengthen, but it completely goes the other way. And as Mr. Hutchinson said, you couldn't really use this, but it's kind of like a reverse domino theory, where you've got Poland, solidarity. It's like a sort of a movement that becomes a political party that wins 99 of the 100 possible seats in elections. The Berlin Wall falls down in 1989, in November 1989. and then the reunification of Germany in 1991. We've got new elections being held in Romania and other places, Bulgaria. So you've got all these places, and then in 1990, Latvia and Lithuania, who are part of the Soviet Union, the USSR, declare themselves independent. So what's happening now is also because of these changes to the communist system, they're now wanting to become independent from the entire communist system. Basically, the end of the USSR then really is these countries begin to want to become independent. There's an attempted coup d'etat. It's basically an uprising against the it's an uprising by the I'm sure it's like an uprising by the communist government against Gorbachev. I'm not sure. Check if any of you got the revision notes book. There's something about that in there. But basically, there's a coup d'etat which is won by Boris Yeltsin. I believe that was his name. Who was from Boris Yeltsin, who basically, Boris Yeltsin, who was the president of the Russian Socialist Republic. Gorbachev resigned, and by the end of 1991. The Soviet Union was no more, and in 1991 the Warsaw Pact also was dissolved. So the main things here, they didn't have much money, they had to withdraw troops, they had to limit the number of arms they were producing, and also Gorbachev and President Bush Sr. Signed START 1 in 1991, which also would reduce their nuclear arsenals by 25 to 35% over 7 years. So the main thing, it was reducing costs, so withdrawing troops from Afghanistan, withdrawing forces from the satellite states, also a slight change in the communist policy results in a want for independence. The Warsaw Pact is dissolved, members of that hold their own elections, most of them become democratic. Then nations from the USSR want independence. There's an uprising, a coup d'etat against the established government. I think it was essentially against Gorbachev by his own communist government. They didn't want him in power anymore, and this was sort of stopped by Boris Yeltsin, who was the leader of the Russian Socialist Republic. He then becomes the leader of now Russia. Gorbachev resigns, and the Soviet Union is no more. This is now the end of the Cold War, and that's nearly the end of foreign policy, except obviously the Gulf War is next. So hopefully that's helped you guys.